Okay.
Yeah, good.
Okay, are we good?
Yep, seems
okay.
so.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome from 11 o'clock here in Seattle on the West Coast. Thank you for inviting me to talk about mass timber buildings, Baugruppen, collective housing. Irvin's asked me to talk a little bit about what I'm up to and also just mass timber collective housing in general. My thesis today will be on Holzbaugruppen. So Holzbau, German, Holzbau, wood building, Baugruppen is a collective form of housing common in Germany, and it's also growing in Austria, Switzerland, and we've been trying to bring it to the United States for several years. A little bit about myself. I graduated from Virginia Tech, which is on the East Coast of the United States, way back in 2005. But in 2003, 2004, I was working for a medium-sized architecture firm in the town of Freiburg in Germany, right where France, Germany, and Switzerland all come together. And the firm was doing some relatively innovative stuff. At the time, I didn't have any idea of what they were doing, but it was I was super fascinated by it. And they were actually using mass timber, Brettstapel. Here in the US, we call it Dauer laminated timber. This is the kind of the boards that are on end, stack, 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 on a variety of projects. And at the time in the United States, there was nothing like this. And I was just completely floored by it. And the firm was also really interested in a lot of low energy buildings. And that's kind of where my interest in low energy buildings, sustainable buildings, passive house, eco districts was really fomented. So it was a really kind of powerful time for me as a young architect. And then I came back to the United States, and there was no mass timber industry really here for years and years and years. So I moved out here to Seattle with my wife, who I met in Freiburg, but she's actually from California. And we started our life here. So I've worked here for 15 years, took a year off last year to go back to Germany. You know, I worked there before. I grew up in Germany as a kid as well. And I have a lot of affinity for Germany. All of my interests as an architect, Baugruppen, mass timber construction, wood construction, passive house, right? They're all kind of from the DACH, the Germany, Austria, Switzerland area of Europe. And so I had this really strong desire to try to go back. And I worked with a very innovative firm there. But it was not quite fit for us. And then coronavirus hit. And so we came back. So I'm actually back working for the firm I was with before I went to Germany, and we're working on a number of mass timber projects right now. We've got a 5,000 square meter mass timber school utilizing CLT panels, and we're in the feasibility phase for a number of office buildings. So again, my mass timber experience, I'll show a couple of the projects that we worked on, started with a duplex, a two-family home in the German city of Mulheim way back in 2004. And then I had this huge gap where for years and years and years, I tried to get something going and just couldn't figure it out. But I had an opportunity to use Brettstapel again here in Seattle in 2019. So we don't have any cars. We have 2 cargo bikes, we have 2 kids. So we try to live this like super sustainable, low impact, low carbon life. So this was the duplex that I worked on in Germany in 2004. It doesn't look, it has not aged very well. The building is a concrete core, and then the shell around it is Brettstapel, the Dauer laminated timber. And then outside of that, they have this hull, the shell of polycarbonate, the Rodica panels. I'm sure you guys are familiar with them. And at the time, in the design phase, there was a lot of time spent on the sizing of the mass timber because it's part of an energetic concept, not necessarily structural. And so here you can kind of get a sense of what the interior of the building is. So like I said, they were super, super interested in these kind of alternative low energy buildings. The principal of the firm, Gunther Pfeiffer, is still working in Germany. He is adamantly opposed to passive house, as I've learned over the course of the years. But at the time, they were doing these really, really amazing things. So the center part of this building is kind of a winter garden that's all of the rooms in the duplex open onto, and it's not a duplex that's two separate units. It's this duplex that interweaves within itself, kind of within this polycarbonate shell. So all of the Brettstapel is kind of weaving its way here, and here, and up here, and then again here and here. And so they're really just utilizing it as a thermal storage for the building in winter. And then in summer, they can just open up all of the windows. They have some vents here. They get some stack effect, and supposedly it's quite comfortable. Fast forward to 2010, 2011. My boss here in Seattle is Italian, and so we tried to take a stab at doing a couple of mass timber schools in Italy at the time. He has an Italian passport, and so we were able to figure out some collaboration with local firms there as well. And so again, we're really kind of trying to do this form finding with mass timber. Where does it make sense? Where does it not make sense? This was really early in kind of our explorations on mass timber. So there are things in this that I definitely would not do today. But at the time, it was kind of, for here in the West Coast, like there weren't many people trying to do things like this. And so we were really kind of trying to foment this discussion, not just hoping that we would get a project in Italy, but also locally. We've been trying to push prefabrication, passive house, mass timber for quite a number of years. We unfortunately did not place in this competition, but it kind of opened up a wider realm of mass timber for us. Continuing on to a couple of speculative projects that we've undertaken. This is a 6-story building here in kind of a commercial district in Seattle. Really simple framework, CLT floors, just super high performance facade, and just kind of coming up with these really compact templates that we could potentially use on other projects. We've since taken this concept and the 5,000 square meter primary school that we're working on is similar to this, but it's only 2 stories. And then the year before I moved to Germany, like I said, I got an opportunity to work in Brettstapel again. So then again, this is the boards that are kind of all ganged together in a row. There wasn't an American firm that was doing this. There was a firm in Canada and British Columbia, which if you guys know Vorarlberg, British Columbia has become the North American version of Vorarlberg. There are a number of mass timber fabricators, manufacturers. We can get CLT now. We can get really nice glue lamp stock, really good, really elegant dowel laminated timber panels as well, like this one. And so there was a marina. This is an office over a lake that burned down a couple of years ago, and the client was basically told by the city that they needed to replace it as soon as possible. So we built this huge steel and concrete platform that you can see right here, but we wanted to do something that was a little bit different for the roof. And we actually looked at doing cross-laminated timber panels. We have these overhangs, and the CLT actually performed better on the overhangs. But at the time, there was really only one CLT manufacturer here in North America on the West Coast, and they were extremely busy. So the price was really high, the lead time was really long, and we talked to this firm that was making the dowel laminated timber panels, Structurecraft, who are doing really amazing, innovative work. They're big fans of Grasshopper and Rhino, and using all of these processes to kind of optimize not just the way that they're fabricating things, but also the way that they're designing, and it's super elegant. So they worked with us. Again, it's over the water. The only way to install these panels, which were trying to think, about 3 meters wide by, let's say 15, 16 meters long, was to actually load them up on a barge that had a crane and then pick them up off of the barge from the water and put them on the building. So it was a little bit of a disconcerting experience. It was everybody there, it was really their first time doing anything like this, but it went together super fast. We got the roof on in a day. And it's just stunning. Like I love the way it looks. And I could talk about the differences between CLT, cross-laminated timber, and dow laminated timber for hours. Like there's so many different things from a functionality, design, structural, like they're very different, but very kind of gorgeous. So Irvin's wanted me to talk a little bit about Baugruppen, and I'm going to show 3 Baugruppen in Germany that are projects. They're all mass timber. They're all close to passive house, and they're all kind of in the direction of a project that we've been trying to go in. And so they've been very, what's the word I'm looking for? Beneficial as models for us to kind of go back and look through. So I'll present these 3, and I'll present a little bit of what we're doing, and we can open it up for questions. So the first project is in Stuttgart. It's the Max Ox by Architektur, who I believe are also in Stuttgart. When I saw this rendering, I think it was like 2010, 2011, maybe a couple years later, I was just completely floored, right? So from the passive house standpoint, like everything about this was just like singing to me. It's a compact building. There's external shades to deal with the overheating. There's a nice sense of community. So I saw this, it was like, this is exactly the kind of Baugruppe that we're trying to do. Like it's modern, it's clean. The windows are all kind of similar size, right? So I think, it looks good as an architect, and then it's also, I think, simpler to do, as a passive house as well. And so a little bit of a background on this project. It's 11 homes. 2 of them are barrier-free. The units range quite a bit in size, from 56 to 115 square meters. So I believe it's 1 bedrooms all the way up to 4. It doesn't have a ton of community space, but it has a little bit. There's a small courtyard in the rear. And then there's a community space by the entry, and it has a little kitchen, kind of a coffee counter, essentially. The wood fabricator for the project was Holzius. They're based in Germany. They have this really interesting mass timber product it's a little bit like dow laminated timber, but with big solid members that are kind of ganged together. And they don't use glues, they don't use metal. In the individual panels, they use metal screws when they fasten them together. And it has a really wonderful aesthetic. So the mass timber elements in the project, like I said, there's the floors. It's the HPV. So that's the Holzbeton Verbund, the concrete wood hybrid. And we've seen that in a lot of projects. We're doing a lot of things in that nature here as well. The concrete is really more for dampening the sound than anything else. And then it's also in the walls. So the walls have this wood material as well, with exterior insulation beyond that. Mobility, there's an underground parking garage that's part of a larger district, as well as underground bike parking. Like I said, it's almost passive house. They're shooting for the KFW 55, which is kind of the next step up from passive house. And so this is the finished product. Again, 4 stories. This is the little communal kitchen area. Decent sized balconies, nice little roof deck on the top, decent landscaping, and it's part of this larger development, right? So I think it's integrating into that neighborhood fairly well also. And again, so everything is kind of this similar story as the adjoining buildings, really nice, elegant wood facade. We don't have a lot of places that we can actually build like this in Seattle, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But this is exactly like the form of something that we're trying to do. Again, another glimpse of the facade. And so this is the interior. The wall on the right is concrete. That's part of the stairwell and the elevator shaft for the building. In almost every German project that I've ever seen, the stairwell is reinforced concrete, and that's for fire purposes. I've seen a couple of projects in Scandinavia where they've been able to get away from doing the reinforced concrete core, but I think it's fairly difficult in Germany due to the fire regulations, but it doesn't really seem to hamper anything, and they get a pretty good mix in how those 2 elements come together. So you can start to see the wood paneling as well for the ceiling, the HPV deck. Again, super minimal. It's very clean lines. This almost has a white lime finish on some of the units, and this feels very Swedish to me. I'm not quite sure why, but there's something about it that feels very Scandinavian. Generous windows, decent sized units. So on the left, here's a picture of the project under construction. So you can start to see that these are made up of bigger elements, right? So I want to say these are like 25 by 25 centimeter cross section panels that they laminate together with dowels and also with there's like a tongue and groove system, and then they just drop it into place, and then they'll pour the concrete over it. This is the breakdown of the units. So these are smaller units, 60 to 86. The symbol here, these are the accessible units, the light green, family-sized units. So you get like this really diverse mix of people living within the same facility. The way development works in most of North America, we don't really get a diversity in housing sizes. So let's say a 4-story multifamily building is going up, there'll almost always be studios or 1-bedroom units. So it's really difficult to find a new building that has room for a family. It's very, very difficult. And so a lot of people are forced to rent in small homes. And then there's overcrowding. And with COVID, we've seen how that affects things. Or you have to rent or buy a very expensive single family house. And Germany is kind of the same way. The single family houses are extremely expensive, especially where we were in and around Munich. And so, we were able to find new family size housing with 3 bedrooms for us and our 2 kids, for a reasonable price. And it was actually very, very well laid out. So you can see here the cross section of the wood. This is the tongue and groove system that I was talking about. Just general layout of the plan. So here's the concrete core with the vertical circulation, the stairs and the elevator. This is that community space on the ground floor, and then just the individual units. And so you can start to see, these are fairly compact, but I think the layout is really smart. So we'll move on to another project, Dreiecksgrün. This is in Berlin by Rodig Schoep architects, who have done a number of really stunning mass timber projects. They've also done a number of really amazing Baugruppen. And so some of you are probably quite familiar with some of their projects. Also on it were Atelier Piquet and Rosinski Sturm, who also have some really, really elegant projects. I love this building. It blends in well with the surroundings, I think. I love it because it's also on a quieter street. In most American cities, you can't build large buildings like this on a quiet street. They're usually on very loud and busy arterials or highways. And I also like the breadth of the building, right? So all of our lots in the US tend to be very narrow, and this is a very wide lot, and I think it allows for some very generously proportioned units as well. All of the ground floor units on this are maisonettes. I don't know any other term for it other than maisonettes, but they're basically 2-story units within the building. So all of these have the living area on the ground floor, and then generally bedrooms up above. 13 units, 7 of them are flats. They're on the upper floors, the 6 maisonettes, like I said, that has a community roof deck with guest suites. Actually, this one does not have a guest suite. And it has a very large shared courtyard. All of the units on the front side open up to the street. And on the back side, they have deeper balconies for private exterior space as well. The wood fabricator is Zublin Timber, also out of Germany. They did the CLT wall and floor panels, which we'll have a couple of pictures I can show you, as well as the prefabricated exterior walls. I spent much of the last couple of weeks attending a symposium on the future of wood prefabrication in North America. It's been very eye-opening having worked in Germany and coming back to the States and seeing just how far behind we are and in a lot of regards. So we don't really have a lot of firms that can panelize wall assemblies for like passive house projects in the US. There are only a couple, and it's only in the last couple of years that we've really had those capabilities. And so having firms that can do that in your neighborhood, which many German cities do, it's I think it does a lot for kind of expanding on the capability of firms to do projects like this. So I would say that the wood infrastructure, the fabrication infrastructure is also really critical. Mobility, underground parking, again, this is also the KfW 55. My understanding is that with the, the KfW 55 homeowners, residents are able to obtain a very low interest loan, and that's the loan that they're using effectively as their portion to buy into these Baugruppen. So it seems to be a way of kind of incentivizing these non-market, more moderately affordable homes. Some of them are much more high-end. This one is definitely one of them. So like I said, generous court on the back side. The units on the rear all have a little terrace, and the upper flats have these large protruding balconies. There's interior views. This one on the left is the one of the maisonette units. So again, you're seeing the mass timbers exposed for the ceilings, but for the walls, they're prefabricated frames. They're not solid mass timber. They're not CLT panels on the walls, and so all of that is covered in gypsum. On the right over here, you can again see the concrete. Again, this is part of the vertical circulation, and you can see that as well. I'm just gonna grab a quick sip of water. Just an interior view looking out towards the rear courtyard. You can see the generously proportioned balconies. You know, I think this is a fairly elegant space. Again, I could show this to the people who are in our Baugruppe, and all of them would be like, yes, that's exactly what we want. And then this is looking out across the street side. And then a couple of quick details. Like I said, the wall is a prefabricated panelized frame system. So they've got wood frame, Rahmenbau, and then it's filled with mineral wool for the fireproofing. This is the plan detail. So they've got heavier mass timber beams and columns for the structure. And then those panels are kind of just flat packed, brought into site, and placed around it. From a passive house standpoint, I look at this detail and I kind of cringe a little bit. The CLT panels on the floor actually protrude out into the exterior environment. So there's a little bit of a thermal bridge here. It's wood, so it's better than concrete, but it's not ideal from a passive house standpoint. And I would say that this is I wanted to show this because this is a big issue for us on a number of projects where people want to keep the mass timber floor continuous through the external envelope. And it's really difficult to have that conversation where we convince them that it may look great, it may perform fine over time, but if we're trying to achieve something as efficient as passive house, it's definitely not ideal. And also wrapping it with insulation also isn't necessarily ideal. Our solution is generally to go with thermal break and then have columns, and the structure for the balcony is kind of all vertically carried on the exterior. Again, picture of the building under construction. You can start to see the wood columns and beams kind of forming the structure of this. Again, here's the concrete core for the circulation, and they're starting to install the panels. The section, this is kind of a classic. I love all of the Berlin Grundrissites buildings. 22 meters to the Traufoa, and then you've got your 45-degree Dachwinkel roof angle that it springs off of. It's very, very common. Just run through the floor plans real quick. So coming in off of the street, there's a couple of units that have access off of the street, their own front door. This is the common entrance. It's kind of a little community space with a restroom, and then it has two means of egress going up to the top floor. So like I said, all of the units on the ground floor and the first floor are maisonettes. So this unit is the upper floor for this unit is the upper floor for this unit, and so on. From floors 2 through 4, these are all stacked flats. I believe they're all accessible as well, barrier-free. It's a big topic in a lot of our buildings right now, is how do we retrofit existing buildings that weren't designed to be accessible and inclusive. And so we try to start with that mindset so that retrofitting elevators and low barrier thresholds isn't something we need to worry about. And then this is again the roof terrace with the two means of egress. It's fairly simple. The last project I'll show is Walden 48. Walden 48 is also in Berlin. It's a much larger project that wrapped up, I want to say last year. It's by Schrabi Architekten, who were collaborating with Raupach Architekten. Schrabi have done a lot of really well done mass timber projects in Berlin over the last couple of years. I think you'll recognize this project, and you'll also recognize a lot more. Set the context, this is Lahnberger Allee, very loud road, one of the loudest roads, actually one of the loudest streets in the city. It also has I think it's the S-Bahn running down the middle. The site sits next to an old cemetery, and then there's this old cemetery wall that was required to remain for the project. And so the building is kind of set within these two worlds, and it's kind of this weird duality of the loud streets and the quieter courtyard with the cemetery. There's a lot of greenery visible, and the building kind of really reflects that duality. So it's kind of this boring street face for the loud front, and then it kind of opens up on the backside. So it's in Friedrichshain in Berlin, 41 homes. There's also a small business with a couple of space for kind of a couple of desks or co-working stations. Similar to the previous project, the ground floor units are all maisonettes. There's a communal roof deck. There's a large community room. There's also a very large shared courtyard. The wood fabricator for the project was Rubner Holzbau, also in Germany. They supplied the CLT walls and the floor panels for the project. This building is much bigger. It has an underground bike parking, and the access to this one, as a dad who bikes with kids, and I have large cargo bikes, this one just sings to me. It's so elegant. And again, it's aiming for the KfW 55. So this is the backside of the building. All of the units on the backside have balconies. The balconies are also, this is facing southern direction, so it's part of the solar strategy as well to prevent overheating in summer. All of these are thermally broken, so my passive house hat gets excited about that. And then again, you can start to see more of the context on the quieter side of the street. So this is the communal room. It's got this huge dividing walls. I love the number of kids in these pictures. I could imagine living here with my kids, and they would have the freedom to not just roam the neighborhood, but hang out in the building with their friends if they wanted. It's a really elegant space. This is the bike ramp down to the bike parking station. You can also see some of the larger cargo bikes are over here. So I'm guessing that this is maybe 1.5 meters, 2 meters, and might be a little bit difficult to navigate with the much larger bikes. You can again see the inside of the Friedhof, the cemetery wall that was required to remain. A couple of views of the interior. Once again, we see the CLT floor panels. All of these projects accentuate the joints between the panels much more than we do in our projects, which I find kind of intriguing. And I'm also wondering if that's a constructability issue due to moisture and expansion in the long term. So here's the balcony. Again, generous sized balcony. I love that the wood is all continuous. You can start to see the greenery of the cemetery again. Here's some of the maisonette units under construction. So you can see columns, beams with the CLT panels set above them. Much larger panel being set. Another thing that I find really intriguing, having worked in both countries, both Germany and the US, we don't use CLT panels for walls. We almost exclusively use them for floors, and there are only a couple of projects that have used them for walls. The big reason on the West Coast is because of earthquakes, for seismic reasons. Having buildings that are made of wood, they need to be a little bit flexible. And so there are a couple of issues with all of the walls and floors being wood. The building actually might not flex enough, or doesn't flex enough. So on the West Coast, it's pretty rare to see buildings. On the East Coast, New York, Toronto, they've kind of started, Toronto especially, become a kind of a mass timber hub where I've seen a lot more wall panels. But then in Germany, it's almost exclusively, I would say, CLT wall panels when they're in a project. I've seen a ton of projects that have CLT wall panels, but they don't even have them for floor panels. So it's a little bit of an inversion, which again, it's just the weirdness of how we work, I guess, and the context of how we have to work as well. So laying the wall panels, again, this is the maisonette level, reinforced concrete for the vertical circulation. And then here's a layout of the ground floor. So this is the foyer. Here's that community room. Our wonderful little bike ramp. The courtyard here. And then these are all maisonette units with their own little kind of private terrace right out in front. And then all of the upper units they're basically just stacked flats. And again, they vary quite widely in size. From one bedroom to 4. We really just don't see this variability in the US. And that's one of the things that I hope to be changing here in the near future. And then here's the rooftop. So here's a little kind of a coffee kitchenette, restroom, storage, and then the community roof deck. And then again, these are all individual units, three stairwells kind of serving those throughout the building. And then these guys have a much larger roof terrace. And then again, back to the section of the building, maisonette. Here's our cemetery, our wonderful little underground bike parking. These are the stacked flats, and then the roof terrace. Again, the 22-meter trafoa. I don't know if the translation is in English for that. And then our roof. Which brings me to the project that we're working on. I don't actually have that much to show on this right now because it's mostly calculation. So about 7 years ago, we started down the track of trying to get a big group of people that we knew were interested in doing a Baugruppe to sit down with us and figure out how we would do it. A lot of the European projects have the capability to do a project slowly. The cities support them, their access to financing is easier, the entitlement process isn't as difficult. Here in Seattle, projects have to move very fast. The development scene here is it's still really, really hot, even with coronavirus. If land comes up for sale, it gets bought almost immediately. And so we really didn't have the capability to come up with any of the money as even pulling together, because the cost of land is so high, to buy land and then to hold that land, develop the project, get our entitlements, and then construct it. And that even if we decided to kind of go the mass timber route and have a much shorter construction duration, it just wasn't going to be feasible. So we spent a couple of years trying to figure out how to do that and realized that it wasn't going to happen, and so we left. And then I went to Germany, and then Germany didn't work out. So I came back here. And my good friend Aaron Yankauskas, who I used to be in business with, we put our heads together. We kind of came up with a model that's a little bit of a hybrid, and it's based a little bit on the work of Zanderoth Architekten, who are also in Berlin, who do a similar approach where it's not a full community-driven project. They effectively start the design of the project, and then as people come in, they can modify plans as needed. And so it's a little bit more streamlined in that regard. We just realized that there was no other way that we were going to be able to do this. So the project that we're looking at is about 20 homes, 5 floors, 4 units per floor, ranging in size from 1 bedroom to 3 bedroom. I'm trying to think of the conversion to square meters would be maybe 35 square meters up to about 100, 110. No, sorry, that's wrong. 50 square meters to about 110 square meters. For common space, we'll have a common roof deck that everyone has access to. We'll have a nice courtyard with a garden in it. We don't know who our wood fabricator is, but we're talking to a couple of people. We're trying to figure out the most optimal structure that we can do. And right now that seems to be glue lam columns and beams as kind of a framework, and then CLT panels as kind of, it's the default on most of our projects in the Pacific Northwest right now. So we have kind of a sense of where that'll go. Again, we're all bikers, so we're hoping to be car free. We won't be able to do underground parking. It's not a big enough project. The cost to dig into the ground here in Seattle is also really high. So it'll be a ad grade bike parking garage. And then given my history, like it has to be passive house. So we figured out the numbers. We have a good sense of what it will take, what all of our assemblies are. And so really the next step for us is we're going to be talking to some social impact investors and trying to leverage their funds to do moderately affordable, family-sized, mass timber, low energy passive house buildings in Seattle. There's a problem with this though. Unlike most European cities, multifamily buildings are illegal in 80% of the land in Seattle. So all of this hatched area and all of these colored areas are where multifamily housing is allowed. But everything around it, all of this stuff, it's almost all single family houses. And so we can't even build a 2-family house on those lots. And you could do a 2-family Baugruppe. It's totally feasible. There are a number of people that have done it, but it's just not really an option. And also I wanna have a project that's a little bit larger. I wanna have this, community that we kind of grow up together. Our kids grow up together, and then we grow old together. So, like I said, this is what a lot of Seattle looks like, where we only limit multifamily housing to these louder arterial roads, and then everything off of it is quiet detached houses. These are the books as an architect, as a Baugruppe, as someone who has been obsessed with social housing, community-led housing for most of my career, that have been really, really kind of eye-opening for me. The first one, Kirsten Ring's Self-Made City, features a number of Baugruppen interviews, conversations. It's a really great book. Co-Housing Inclusive was written by Maikls Ilaiasons, who lives in Berlin. He's with ID22. Michael was one of the initiators of the, it's the Spreewald, it's not right. There's a big cooperative on the Spree in Berlin with a bunch of really innovative unit layouts. So the cluster Wohnungen, the cluster apartments, he's affiliated with that project. He wrote the Co-Housing Inclusive, and again, it's a number of projects, essays, diagrams, topics on funding and financing, land procurement, that was also really good. Das Wiener Modell, the Vienna model. This is a book that was written by Wolfgang Förster, who's an architect theorist in Vienna on the the current social housing in Vienna. And if you don't know the social housing scene in Vienna, they are doing amazing, amazing work across a variety of scales, very innovative stuff, super gorgeous. They've started doing Baugruppen, and they're starting to do a number of Baugruppen, and some of them are just very large. And as an architect, I'm amazed, jealous, enthralled. I saw a couple of these projects when I went in 2017 for the Passive House conference, and I didn't make it the last time when we were living in Bayern, so now I have to find an excuse to go back to Vienna. It's really my heart as an architect. Their housing scene is just amazing. And then the last one is the Building and Living in Communities, Bauen und Wohnen in Gemeinschaft, was from an exhibition on collective housing that was done, I think it was through the Deutsches Architektur Museum. And again, it features a number of projects and essays on collective housing. So our hope is that in the next couple of months, we'll have finalized our business plan, gotten sign off from the bank, and started down our process of semi-collectively designing some very nice, somewhat affordable urban mass timber co-housing. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Mike. It was amazing show. There are a few questions. The first thing is in short words, just to explain the idea of this Baugruppe. I think people already got it from your story, more or less, but exactly how it happens. So we are just say you are two families, say, and now you want to initiate something bigger. It's all dirt expensive. It's very complicated. It's all problems all over. You have to buy the land. You have to get the building kind of permit or whatever. I don't know the procedure in the States exactly, but you have to somehow. So it's anyway kind of an investment. How is it financed? What is the how many families do you need to take in so it becomes more or less feasible? What is the approximately the cost of a unit? Say, well, it will be differently in the
It varies considerably.
Yeah, but anyway, it's a very complicated process. How it goes on?
It is. So here in Seattle, we're looking at about 15 to 20 units for a number of reasons. After 20 units, the buildings start to become very large, and they're considered commercial and not residential. And so there's a cost premium to that. So we're trying to keep it under that threshold. In terms of cost, I don't even know how to compare. So a single family house in Seattle is $850,000 US. I think that's about 750,000 euros, more or less, which is really expensive.
Is it the construction cost, or is it just the property price?
It's mostly the land. So if you were to buy a house, almost all of the value is in the dirt. Almost none of it's in the building. But there's not a lot of land where multifamily housing is legal. And so what part of the issue is, if you find land that's multifamily, that's zoned for multifamily, you're competing with corporate developers who want to come in and either build row houses and sell them, very, very expensive on the market to people who can afford it, or build really, really small studio or one-bedroom units that they'll rent out, at a very high rate. And so we're looking at we're kicking out the developer, right? We're saying we're the developer and we're not going to make a profit. We're going to invest in the building and do it as well as we can. We're about 20% cheaper than a comparable market rate unit would be. So it's not deep affordability, but there are methods that we could do to get that number even lower. So in the city of Tübingen, in the city of Freiburg, Vienna, they hold land, Hamburg as well. The city itself holds land, and then they will sell that land at a discount to Baugruppen through a number of different methods. So Tübingen has like a competition, and so they'll say, okay, we're going to bring out this parcel. 5 groups that want to do a Baugruppe will submit what their proposal is. And so you could have one that says, we're going to be multi-generational. So it'll be elderly residents, families, single moms, kids. Will have a huge age diversity. Mm-hmm. You could have another one that says, we're going to have half of the building is refugee housing, and we'll rent that out at a very low rate. And then the other half is our Baugruppe. So there are a number of different ways that in policy, I think, has to become a big part of it if we want to find that deep affordability. There are a number of ways that cities, especially in cities where they own a good chunk of the land, or when they bring it out for parceling out for like a larger development, utilizing that land in a means that's, you know, not necessarily for market rate development would be beneficial, right? So it brings families into those neighborhoods. It brings people of a better social and economic mix into those neighborhoods. So I think the policy side and the land side could play a big part in that. So if we took the land out of our costs, let's say we find a family that has land and they don't want to sell that land, they want to lease it to the building, we could do that. That would be a viable option as well. That would reduce our construction costs by about another 20%. So if we were 750,000 euros, we're now 40% lower than that. So I'm not the best at math. I think it's about 450,000 euros. Right. So then that becomes a lot more attainable in a mortgage for families. The other thing is that a number of projects in Germany are done actually as rentals or cooperatives. They're not done as a condo that you would sell to another family. And so that becomes a way of also keeping the price of the unit down. So in the city of Berlin, there's a number of Baugruppen that are done this way, and they rent for, I want to say, €1.50 per square meter, which ends up being 40%, 50% less than the market rate. So there are a couple of different ways to tackle the financial aspects, but it's the financing for us, especially on the East Coast, where we don't have banks that will really fund cooperatives. We don't really have banks that are used to working with architects who aren't part of a large for-profit development team. And we're also not doing affordable housing. So affordable, like social housing in the US, there are a number of venues that you could do to get financing, but there are a lot of really difficult requirements as well that would, if it were a much larger project, be feasible, but on the smaller scale, it's really difficult to do. Does that answer the question?
I hope so.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, then there was this was the question from Juris. Juri Jārums, vai tu vēlies uzdot papildinošu jautājumu kādu vēl? I'm asking.
Not as a question, but I was listening and immediately thinking, well, the land problem. Well, I'm working in a municipality near our capital city, Riga, and I was immediately thinking, well, land. Okay, so we have financial controls and state controls and legislations that says that if the municipality is selling anything, it needs to be for the maximum possible price, etc. So that's not possible. And so there were several things that I thought, well, how could we apply the concept of Baugruppe? But I was kind of more hopeful when I started. And it's not a local question of people willing to cooperate or the technical competence, but I think it's mostly legislation. And also, what surprised me is that you're freely talking about people coming together and getting a loan from bank for the lower interest rate for the better energy efficiency, and I'm kind of I have more pessimistic experience with the banking sector, and my feeling at the moment in Latvia is that they are not very much seeing the difference between good house energy wise or energy for savings wise and the kind of the usual wise.
In this case, we are quite similar to the States. Actually, bank that doesn't distinguish good quality, or the main task is that they have to secure themselves in a way that they can grab this property if somebody is not paying on time. So you are always so it's done so that the banks are on the safe side, like 200%. And this is the main task. It doesn't make much sense, but it should change actually. And Krišjānis could maybe say a few words about this, how it could maybe change in the future, in near future, because of this European, this green new Green Deal or whatever. Krišjāni, tu vēl esi?
Yes. I'm. Basically, it's quite a long process, but here in Europe, the banking sector is reorientating its practices, how it's doing, I'll say its business, because as far as I remember, starting from 2025, the public, let's say, publicly traded banks should provide detailed information on how, let's say, green their portfolio is, their loan portfolio is, and it's the thing is called. I don't remember the term, but they should be, let's say, developing more and more so-called green banking products. You can start to see that, for example, they also in Latvia they are offering better rates if you are buying electric cars for a lease, and so on. But for sure, in Scandinavian countries and in Germany, this process has gone a bit further. Basically, they are doing it already for years. Because in these countries, it goes together, let's say, commercial banks and state development banks, like this, Michael, in Germany, this KfW.
KfW, yep.
Yes. They already have kind of, let's say, programs for that for years. Yep. You can argue whether they are very precise at addressing equality issues and so on. But at least they have a kind of motivation to develop also this type of products. And then also here in Latvia, yes, I can say that the discussion has started. Our colleagues from a local union of architects 2 days before attended the meeting with the Association of Commercial Banks, and they're really were having a deep discussion how they can provide far better quality for, let's say, small scale housing, detached housing, and so on. Mm-hmm. So I would say that within 2 or 3 years we might see the progress here. Also regarding mortgage products.
Okay.
In the banking sector.
Okay, let's look in the future with some certain hope. We'll see. So then there was another few questions. So one was, okay, I will group the questions about the this Baugruppen and multifamily stuff in one group, and ask then Toms to ask his question afterwards. So one question was from Marita: is this car-free option something that is supported in the legislation in the States, so you can build something that has no parking spaces at all, for instance, or just only temporary for visitors?
So it depends on where in the city you are. So if you're near tram or light rail or bus that has fairly frequent service, the city allows you to not build any parking. And so for us, like I said, we would prefer to not provide parking. We might try to accommodate one spot that could be for guests or for accessibility if someone is in a wheelchair and needs to drive. But we really want to push kind of the envelope on the car side, and so it's not required by any means. I think one of the three I showed had car parking, and I would say probably half, if not more, do have car parking, especially when they're not in the immediate downtown core.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So then I will ask afterwards. It's just about some certain products, but Toms maybe can ask himself the question he wanted to ask.
Yes, thank you, Mike, for the very inspiring presentation. I think it's so needed, these alternative models, how we can develop cities and dwellings in general. And my question was more about the timber in general, or the mass timber housing in US, about the general public perception. Here in Latvia and even in Scandinavia, there's still a lot of stigma, a lot of stereotypes about timber housing. Especially when it comes to multi-story buildings. How is the situation in US or in West Coast? And how is the legislation? Is it supporting it or not?
Yeah, so this is a good one. So we don't really build with block or concrete for most housing in the US. So all of our kind of single family detached houses, almost all of them are wood frame construction. And so from the smallest scale, we're kind of already built around a wood industry. Unfortunately, we're not seeing much advancement on the technological side of that. So like I was saying, there's still not a lot of panelization options, which I would love to see for a number of reasons. So a lot of homes are just built by framers, carpenters on site. And it's a little bit slower process and it's not quite as clean. On the multifamily side, especially on the West Coast, a lot of our buildings under 6 stories will be 1 story of concrete, so a plinth of concrete, and then up to 5 floors above it are again framed. It's not even mass timber or solid construction, it's just a frame over it. We have had a number of issues on the West Coast where those projects have, the wood framed ones have been burned under construction. Which is more just a means of securing your site off hours than anything else. In terms of the mass timber stuff, I think there's a fair amount of receptiveness to it. Our legislature in the US has been very, very slow to respond to either incentivize it. Sometimes cities will do you can build another floor or 2 if you build with mass timber. We're not there yet. In British Columbia, on the other side of the border in Canada, the government there is very much pushing the wood innovation side. There are economic incentives to build with wood. There are land use regulations that benefit working with mass timber. So they're kind of taking this multi-pronged approach. And like I said in the presentation, a lot of the wood products that we have available in the US are all coming from Canada. Their industry is really geared up, and they're trying to do a lot of things on that front to really move it forward. And I think a big part of it is to supply locally, but it's also they're going to be exporting a lot of that fiber to Japan, to China, to whoever will buy it. So they're really kind of geared up in like this weird. We have a lot of land. The land is owned by the government. They want to sell the wood. Back to your comment on the maximum price, right? So they want to get as much as they can for that wood, which isn't necessarily something that I totally support. I'm a big fan of preserving as much of our intact forests as possible. So there's also this from an environmentalist standpoint, there's this weird duality as well. Is it better to build with mass timber? If we're going to build with concrete, is it better to build with mass timber? Or should we be selective in how we use wood? Maybe it's more of a framework, so it's not quite as much lumber, and so we're not having to use as much trees for a building of the same size. There are a lot of these conversations ongoing on the West Coast right now. I'd imagine there's probably similar conversations in your neck of the woods of the Baltics as well.
Yeah, thank you. So, are there any more questions coming in? Or okay, partly I think you already answered that. What is the possibilities? What are the possibilities to get, let's say, in state of Washington, such insulation products, cellulose, blown-in wooden fiber, whatever, everything we like to use here.
Yeah. We have cellulose. That's pretty easy to get. Like the Gutex, the wood fiber insulation. Right now, all of that has to be imported from Germany or Austria. There is a plant on the East Coast in Maine, which is kind of up on almost in Iceland, Greenland, where they will be fabricating a lot of the wood fiber panels, the wood fiber boards. So similar stuff to the Gutex or the Agapan. And I heard that they're going to start fabricating some of that stuff on the West Coast as well. There's a number of people who are involved in the mass timber industry who are looking at teaming up with a lot of those firms to either license their products so it can be manufactured here, or to just buy a mill or team up with them to manufacture it here, so that we're not having to ship these low carbon products across the world.
Oh yeah, it's like several thousand kilometers. Finally, it's
yeah, and it's actually we've done the math, and it's better to ship it here from Germany by train and cargo container than it is to put it on a truck from one end of the United States to the other. So again, it's with carbon footprints, location is everything. So.
Okay, well, so and another thing is that okay, but this is something to discuss later between ourselves, because I think you have a lot more to tell actually, because talking about several timber lamination principles and products and differences and things like that, I would be really happy to invite you for another talk, maybe if you will have some time, but let's discuss it later, because it's
okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, it's could be really nice for architects and easy to understand finally that's coming not from engineer point of view. So thank you, and thanks to the audience, and if nobody has a question anymore, then maybe we will let you go and fall asleep on Friday night finally. No. Thank you very much.
So okay. You'll have to help me with the pronunciation. Prieka?
Prieka, yeah.
Prieka.
Yeah.
I have a whiskey for me and coffee for you.
Thank you. I have a lemon water.
No, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao.
Thanks.
Bye.
Keep in touch.
Will do.
Will do. Bye.
Bye.